Chapter 17. Breaking Apart.
Trisha, Amy, and Theraint waited, staring at the cell phone sitting on the table. It had been a little over an hour when it finally rang. Theraint grabbed the phone. "Taylor?" he asked. He listened for a moment, and then he replied, "Consider it taken care of." He hung up the phone and sagged his head. "It's done," he said. Theraint stood and made a phone call. "Is he coming back now?" Trisha asked when Theraint finished his phone call. "He said he would be here later," Theraint said. Nervousness hung in the air. And it stayed as they waited for Taylor to come back. Trisha paced like a lion in a cage. Amy sat on the couch and watched her. "He will come back," Amy said. "He takes a lot of time to himself," Amy added. "Yeah, I hope so," Trisha replied and looked at the window again. "I must agree with Amy. He will return," Theraint said. "Yeah, I hope so," she said again, letting the blinds drop. They had gone through 4 pots of coffee when finally Trisha was the first to see a headlight pull into the driveway. They all ran outside. Trisha ran in the lead. Taylor got off his bike and fell into her arms. She wrapped her arms around him. He wept in her embrace. They stood in the driveway like this for a long time. Taylor said nothing. She finally got him inside. He sat at the kitchen table and Theraint gave him a hot cup of coffee. He sipped the warm liquid but still felt very cold. The ride had been cold, but Taylor doubted that was the cause of his chill. Taylor sat quietly. He had no want for conversation of any subject. "You did what you had to do," Amy said in a soft but encouraging voice. "Had to do?" Taylor looked and his eyes were red with grief. "I don't want this. I thought having my parents dead was the hardest thing that could happen to me." His thoughts and words were random and full of pain. "But this is all so fucked up. I'm on my fucking edge here," Taylor said, and his head sank again. He did not speak for a long time. "I didn't want this," he whimpered again. Theraint came over to Taylor. He laid a comforting hand on his back. "Scott chose the wrong path and forced you to make a choice that no one should have to consider. You were right. Scott would not have come back. We are still here, Taylor, and we will follow you," Theraint said. Taylor stood from the table. "And what if I lead you to your death, or Trisha's, or everyone? What then?" Taylor questioned and walked out of the room. Trisha followed him. Theraint and Amy went into the other room and watched some news. The riots had spread. Now the rumors of vampires were even starting to make the news. They watched, and both of them knew that the war was coming, and it was coming quickly. California was still relatively quiet. The riots were almost in every other city. The people of Salt Lake were frightened, but the riots had not reached them yet. "We should go to California soon," Theraint observed. "They might not have much more time to move from city to city freely." "Yeah, well, I won't mind getting away from here anyway," Amy sighed. "I can understand that," Theraint said. "No, it's not why you think. Let me guess, you think I'll be happy to get away from my sister's death?" Theraint nodded affirmative. "Well, maybe that's part of it, but mostly right now I'm tired of being on the sidelines," Amy replied. "You want action?" Theraint smiled. Amy blushed in a bright shade of red. "Me too," Theraint said. They went back to watching TV. Taylor looked out over the valley, smoke curling around his head from the cigarette he was smoking. Trisha walked up behind him. "Sweetheart?" she asked. He turned to her. His eyes still had an eerie red quality around them. "I don't know anymore," Taylor replied to a question that was never asked. "I just don't know how much more I can take. First vampires, then Mom and Dad, and now Scott." He squeaked out the last name. "I would have gone through hell for him," Taylor added. "You are going through hell for him. You did what you needed to do, whether you want to hear it or not. You can't what-if yourself to death. But like you and Amy said, if the real Scott saw what he became, he would have wanted the same thing," Trisha replied. She worried about taking the hard line with him. However, everything else she had tried to do did not even make a dent in the wall that he'd put up around himself. "You did right, Taylor," Trisha said. "I don't know any more," he repeated. Taylor looked back to the valley, trying to get his bearing. Again he found confusion and pain. Trisha stood next to him and took a drag off his cigarette. "Sometimes the answers aren't clear-cut. Sometimes you have to do your best and be okay with that," Trisha said, blowing out the smoke. "If he was in your shoes, what would he have done?" Trisha asked. Taylor dropped his head. "He would have done the same," Taylor said quietly. She pulled him into her and they hugged. The world seemed a little safer in his arms. However, the fear that had Taylor's heart was still there and grew by the moment. Self-doubt ripped through him, reducing him to tears. Every time he would regain some composure, a wave of pain rode in like the tide. He felt the old fears that he had dealt with so many years ago resurfacing again. Thoughts like, everyone you touch goes the wrong way. Everything you do is wrong. Who are you to lead the revolution of the vampires? The thoughts he kept to himself, but they slowly ate at him and ate at his resolve. Even in this state, he did his best to hold a brave face for everyone, including Trisha. They all had looked up to him as something so special. If he was truthful with himself, he had to admit there must be something special about him, but it was not like the movies and countless books he read. He felt no extra reserve of strength, no hidden superpower, just plain old Taylor. Nothing to make him rise to the occasion, no hidden truths. Even the resolve that had resided so strongly in him was falling away from him. He could hardly function anymore. This is not how a hero acts, Taylor thought to himself. A fresh wave of tears pouring from his eyes. Inside, Taylor was beginning to fall apart. She sat next to him. "Is there anything I can do or say?" Trisha asked helplessly. "You're doing it better than anyone else. You're here for me," Taylor replied. 20 minutes later, Taylor and Trisha came back in. Taylor held his composure, but just barely. Trisha could see that they had something on their minds. "What's going on, guys?" she asked. "We need to get to California. The situation seems to be getting worse," Therant said. Taylor rolled his eyes, but said nothing. "Where's the fucking pause button?" he thought to himself. "Let's leave out in the morning," Amy suggested. "Taylor, are you okay with that?" Trisha asked. He nodded in agreement. "What the hell? Not like I can hang out here for the big show," he thought sarcastically to himself. They spoke for a while longer, Taylor never uttering a word. They all retired to catch what sleep they could before making the trip in the morning. The stress of the last few days had everyone sleeping, except, of course, Taylor. Trisha slept softly, and slowly Taylor got out of bed. He grabbed his clothes and slipped out of the bedroom door.